In the 1960s and 1970s and even into the 1980s, the unions held a lot of authority and power within the bus industry. Many of the changes that were being implemented throughout the industry at this time would result in many disputes. Now, not all of these disputes would result in strike action. However, the one we're going to be talking about today did, and it destroyed a bus garage. The garage I'm talking about is Love Lane in Liverpool, and the company is Crossville. Come with me back to the 1980s as we take a look at the end of Crossville in Liverpool. 1906 would see the formation of Crossville Motor Company Limited, this having a premises at Crane Wharf, Chester, and the premises was for the purpose of manufacturing motor cars and marine engines. The name Crossville comes from those of its founders, George Crosland Taylor, and a Frenchman, Georgeville, or in English, Georgeville. Unfortunately, the company had little success as a motor manufacturer, and this would result in January 1911 them starting a bus service between Chester and Ellesmere Port. A second bus route would be purchased from a Mr. Lightfoot, and this would run from Kelsall to Chester. By the end of 1911, the company had 5 vehicles in the fleet, and in 1913 the Ellesmere Port route was extended to Birkenhead's New Ferry tram terminus, and this really marked the company's entry into Merseyside. Now, as many of you will know, Crossville wasn't just about operating in Merseyside, they also operated in North Wales as well, and some of these routes were pretty sparse and they served very rural areas, and many of these routes in Wales were profitable only in the summer months when there were plenty of tourists around. So these routes in Merseyside help subsidise these North Wales routes. The North Wales area of the company started from 1924-1925 as they started routes that penetrated deeply into North and Central Wales, some of these coming into being by acquiring existing operators in these areas. On the 1st of May 1929, London Midlands Scottish Railway Company took over the operations of Crossville. Now, Crossville was also a joint British Electric Traction and Tilling Group company, and from the 1st of January 1942, these companies simplified their financial structures, which result in certain bus companies being transferred from one group to another, and of course, Crossville would become a Tilling company. In 1948, the company was acquired by the government, along with, of course, all the other Tilling companies, them all becoming 100% state-owned. Now, fortunately, at that time, the government decided that bus companies should retain their management structures, and throughout all of the changes, the management remained in the hands of the founding Crosland Taylor family, until, of course, the 31st of December 1959, when W.J. Crosland Taylor retired. Incidentally, no other Tilling Group company could claim such a record of continuous management. Now, the formation of the PTEs in December 1969 would see the formation of Merseyside PTE, and this would unify ownership of local transport on both sides of the River Mersey. This, of course, would put the fate of Crossville in the balance. Now, as I mentioned previously, those operations that ran through this sparse Welsh countryside were funded and subsidised by a lot of the routes that were running by Crossville in Merseyside. The company by this point, of course, being a member of the National Bus Company. Now, the PTE of Merseyside could have taken over the operations of both Crossville and Ribble, in a similar way to West Midlands PTE taking over the operations of Midland Red, within their boundary, of course. But this was slightly different up on Merseyside, because from the 31st of January 1972, both Crossville and Ribble became agents of the PTE, and with certain modifications, of course, things continued pretty much the same on Merseyside, and this would be maintained until Deregulation Day on the 26th of October 1986. Prior to the deregulation of the bus services, Crossville was to be split into two companies, Crossville Wales and plain old Crossville. Deregulation would see the PTE, Merseyside, inviting tenders for the provision of services considered to be necessary, but that for practical reasons often split these up into early morning, late evening and Sundays. And this of course is something that still happens today. Well, as far as I know it does. When I was working at Regent Coaches a few years ago now, you'd see tenders coming in and you could put in a tender to run the whole route, or you could put in a tender to run just Sundays, or you could put in a tender to run just the evening services. And this could, in theory, result in 3 operators running one bus route. Up on Merseyside, though, Crossville tendered for a great number of these services and was very successful. In fact, so successful on both sides of the River Mersey that there was some speculation that the bids had been set uneconomically low. Some of the routes that Crossville won from the PTE would result in them running services like the 130 route, which ran from Everton Valley to the Pier Head in Liverpool, and the 173, which ran from Netherley to the Pier Head. These being just 2 examples of the 7 routes that they won. In addition to these, of course, they also won some early morning and late evenings and Sunday journeys on various routes from the city centre to various local areas. On top of this, the company also won the contract for operating the disability buses on behalf of the PTE. These services would be run by PTE-owned vehicles which were adapted to carry wheelchairs. The success of these tenders would result in many more drivers and vehicles being required to work at the Liverpool depot, and this would result in 100 additional drivers being recruited. The need for extra vehicles would see several Leyland Nationals being transferred from other depots, and 36 Daimler fleet lines were hired from Merseyside PTE, some of these having been on loan to Crossville at Heswall. Whilst on loan to Crossville, they'd been painted in the Crossville colours, but they'd been returned back to Merseyside where they'd been painted back into the PTE colours. The Merseyside PTE logos were hastily removed and the Crossville logo was put in their place. But it's fair to say that these fleet lines were past their best, and there were many incidents of breakdowns and trips having to be cancelled due to mechanical defects and issues with these buses. Sadly, this would result in a lot of questions coming from the PTE, with some fines being imposed as well. This would result in a loss of some of the contracts in December 1986. To help alleviate the problem, 10 Bristol VRs, all from ex-West Midlands PTE, were hired from the dealers Martins of Middlewich. These of course being the Metro Camel Wayman bodied ones that I did a video about a little while ago, and if you'd like to see that video, I'm going to try and put a little link up to it in the top right hand corner. These buses were prepared for service at Rock Ferry, just the other side of the Mersey. These buses would retain their West Midlands PTE blue and cream livery, but with Crossville fleet names applied on the side. Now, for those of you who haven't yet seen the West Midlands PTE Bristol VR video, just as a reminder, these were Series 2 Bristol VRs, so they didn't have power steering, and they were a little bit clunky and heavy to operate. Just bear that in mind. The original depot in Liverpool that Crossville had was Edge Lane. This was built in 1927 and opened for business in April 1928. It would be extended in 1933, and further land adjoining the garage was acquired in 1937. Over the years there would be various improvements made to the garage, the last one being in 1975. However, the garage was not ideally located, as it was 3 miles from the city centre and the pier head, and this of course would be where most of the services started and terminated. And of course this would involve a fair bit of dead mileage. In 1985, a new premises became available, this previously being owned by Tate and Lyle, their transport division, Tate and Lyle, the sugar people, of course. And this was in Love Lane and was an awful lot closer to the city centre. The company acquired this, and the transfer of vehicles and routes between Edge Lane and Love Lane occurred in August 1985. The depot and land at Edge Lane was sold and the land was redeveloped. Now, for many years, both sites at the Liverpool depot, Edge Lane and Love Lane, had suffered from rather difficult labour relations. Now, don't get me wrong, it's always good to have a very strong union to back the workforce. And I'm certainly not going to get all political, because that's not what this channel's all about. Being a member of the union is a very positive thing. If you find yourself in trouble or you have a problem, they're normally right behind you and able to help you out. When it comes to looking after your welfare, your health and safety, again, they're normally right beside you, looking out for you. And of course, it's the same when it comes to pay negotiations and conditions negotiations. You can have the best pay rate in the world, but if the conditions are absolutely awful, well, there's still no point doing the job. Likewise, you can have a pretty poorly paid job with good conditions, and that can sometimes be the thing that keeps you going and keeps you working there despite the low pay. Rarely you find that happy medium where you have good conditions and good pay. But despite that, in the industry, you'll find that various union branches at various garages are stronger than others. We had a very similar thing at Stagecoach East Kent, where the Herne Bay garage union branch was a lot stronger than the Thanet union branch. Now, I'm not saying that the Thanet branch was no good, because they were pretty on the ball, but it's just the Herne Bay Garages union branch was a lot stronger and were better at negotiating. So they'd always get slightly better conditions and a slightly higher pay rate than all the other garages. And admittedly, they weren't afraid to use industrial action. Now, apparently, at the Liverpool depot of Crossville, Edge Lane and Love Lane, there was a group of militants who didn't represent the views of the silent majority. These militant union officials being on the union committee. And there's stories of staff who didn't toe the line as far as the union were concerned, being intimidated. These were very hardliner union members. And at the same time, the management wasn't certainly perfect, but they were trying to do their best in a situation at the deregulation of the bus industry that, let's just say, was very unstable. During the days of the National Bus Company, there was a certain amount of financial stability. But along with deregulation, this rug that was financial stability had been well and truly pulled from beneath the company's feet. And it would appear that these hardliners didn't understand that or wouldn't appreciate it. Now, again, don't think I'm pointing fingers. I'm just reading history back as it's been written. So I'm not taking sides of the management and I'm not taking sides of the workers. I'm trying to do my very best to sit on the fence here. An example of this militancy and this readiness of the drivers to strike was seen in May 1986. And this would be a few weeks after some new Metroliner 3-axle double-deck coaches had been allocated to Love Lane. These were intended to be used on a National Express service to Manchester and Leeds, which ran via the M62 motorway. Now, this service, I believe, was jointly operated with East Yorkshire Motor Services Limited, and the way the scheduling and the duties worked was that some of the Crossville drivers would be required to drive similar Metroliners belonging to East Yorkshire. The drivers at Liverpool Garage had negotiated for a certain kind of cab door, and this cab door would be different from the other buses that was used within the Crossville company, and indeed other companies for that matter. These doors for the Liverpool services being deemed a lot safer when handling cash, as sadly even in those days drivers were regularly mugged and attacked for their takings. As cash was taken on these National Express services, the union requested that the Liverpool-style cab doors should also be fitted to the Yorkshire vehicles. With the refusal of this, the union called a strike. But the next day and the next night, the Metroliners were moved to the Ribble garage of Manchester, and were driven by Ribble drivers. This would result in Crossville losing that work permanently, and the only National Express mileage that Liverpool would do was duplication, usually to Birmingham. Now, when these Bristol VRs arrived from West Midlands PTE, now if you remember me saying, they had no power steering. Now, naturally, the union committee objected to there being no power steering fitted to these vehicles, and apparently there was a long-standing agreement that only volunteer drivers would be used on buses that didn't have power steering. Now, it's worth remembering as well, again, these buses weren't in for the long run. They were only a temporary fix, vehicles that were being hired from a dealer. So it certainly wouldn't be practical to have had the buses converted to power steering just for the short period they would be used in Liverpool. Now, no one-man operated buses had been operated at the Liverpool depot without power steering, and apparently the management agreed to allocate them to part-day duties rather than full-day duties. Now, without a doubt, it's hard work driving any bus without power steering, especially a one-man operated bus around a city centre. But that's not to say that it couldn't be done, because obviously these buses had been operating in the West Midlands and around Walsall and places like that since 1975, so they were serviceable, just not what the drivers were used to. Now, I know it's a different company, but in addition to that, Merseyside PTE had run 60 Leyland Atlanteans which didn't have power steering since 1972. But despite this agreement about the buses only being used on part-day duties, the union committee instructed its members not to drive any of these buses. And now you can see this is a situation that is about to boil over. On the 5th of January, a member of the union was allocated one of the buses on the first duty out of the garage in the morning. And of course, the driver would refuse to take the bus out, and this would result in the driver being suspended. And this, of course, would result in the drivers all walking out on strike. The union suggested that these former West Midlands Bristol VRs would be distributed around all the depots and only used on part-day duties there, but this suggestion was turned down by the company. Work resumed on the 13th of January on the understanding that negotiations would take place between the union and the company, and the disputed vehicles would not be used. However, the company couldn't operate all the duties and cover all the work it had without using these Bristol VRs. A compromise was reached, and this, of course, would be the buses only being used on the part-day duties, as I mentioned previously. Now, this is where things start to escalate rather dramatically, because the union committee wanted to call a meeting of its members and put this solution to them for the vote. However, the company wanted the agreement implemented and operational straight away, and the strike was resumed on the 15th of January. The company's view was that drivers refusing to take out roadworthy vehicles, and despite them having power steering, they were, in all accounts, roadworthy, would potentially lead to anarchy with other repercussions at other depots. In addition to that, they believed that the union had bypassed the well-established dispute procedure. All the drivers who had engaged in the industrial action were dismissed on the 24th of January, the company believing that this industrial action was in fact illegal. As a result of this, there were short-lived strikes in support of Liverpool at other Crossville depots on the 26th of January. The striking drivers gained entry to Love Lane Garage, where they managed to stage a sit-in for several days in late January, but the company obtained a court order to evict them. And you can see now that things have turned really nasty. There were rumours going around at the time that Merseyside would take over the operations of Crossville in Liverpool, but these rumours came to nothing, although over half of the dismissed drivers were eventually taken on by Merseyside. Now, in early February, the company was summoned before the Traffic Commissioner, as they'd been receiving fuel rebate for services which they'd not been running for almost a month. Crossville were told if these services were not resumed, their registrations would be cancelled. Some of the services were initially covered from Runcorn, Warrington and Chester, but the attempt to persuade the drivers at Rock Ferry to operate the H3, which was the Liverpool to Rainhill Stoop service, was unsuccessful. Despite the presence of the pickets, staff from the other depots began removing buses from Love Lane, and this would include the special fleet of PTE mobility buses as well. And incidentally, this contract had already been cancelled before the strike, and this was partly due to complaints that some of these hardline drivers wouldn't actually get out of the cab and give assistance to these passengers that needed it. With no other option, Crossville decided to close the depot at Love Lane, and temporary contracts were awarded to fill in the gaps left by the withdrawal of Crossville in Liverpool, with Merseyside, North Western and Shearings of Wigan being the principal operators of these new contracts. Since all this, of course, though, Love Lane depot has been demolished and houses now stand on part of the land that was used as the garage. Crossville would later pass into the hands of the Draw Lane Group, where the English side of Crossville would be split between Midland Red North and North Western. Draw Lane would eventually go on to become British Bus, and on the 1st of August 1996, British Bus was purchased by the Cowie Group. And as we all know, that would become Arriva. However, the remaining Crossville operations in Wirral and Chester area was sold in February 1990 to Potteries Motor Traction, who retained the Crossville name, but would later become part of First Bus, and this would all become part of First Chester and the Wirral. The business would later be sold with depots at Chester, Rock Ferry and Wrexham to Stagecoach Merseyside and South Lancashire in December 2012. So there we go, we've reached the end of the story of how the Bristol VRs from West Midlands managed to upset the Liverpool operations of Crossville. Now, as I said before, I'm not here to take sides, I'm not here to judge. This is just a story within the bus industry that I thought would be interesting to share with you. There's various reasons why bus companies tend to fail. Most of it is to do with money and finances, but sometimes there's other things, the way it's run and the actions of its staff. And fortunately, this sort of thing doesn't happen very often, although there is industrial action from time to time within the industry. I think it's worth mentioning at this point as well that it was very hard to find pictures of both Edge Lane and especially Love Lane for this video. So you've had to make do with some rather nice pictures of Crossville buses in Liverpool over the years. And as for finding pictures of those Bristol VRs in operation with Crossville, well, again, I've drawn a blank with that. And I don't think they actually turned a wheel with Crossville, and that might be the reason why there are no photographs. I've seen a couple of photographs in a book where they're in the yard at Love Lane, but of course that's in a book and I can't really use photographs from a book because of copyright issues, so you'll just have to trust me on that one. So I apologise if the pictures don't always match up with the commentary on this particular video, but as I said, it was really hard trying to find pictures to go along with the context of the video, and I do apologise for that. I hope it doesn't put you off this too much. But Jake, you're saying you've missed something out. We haven't quite reached the end of the story yet. What happened to those errant Bristol VRs? Well, it's funny you should say that because I was just about to tell you. Honestly, I'm not just saying that. The West Midlands PTE MCW Bristol VRs would all find their way to Wilts and Dorset, where they would have a little bit more luck and not cause any industrial action. The buses would arrive with Wilts and Dorset during 1987 and would last with them until around 1990. In fact, Wilts and Dorset would like them so much that they would actually buy additional West Midlands PTE Bristol VRs from not only West Midlands but also one from National Welsh as well. So they certainly couldn't have been that bad of buses, could they? As they seemed to get Wilts and Dorset out of a bit of a hole when they were short of buses. And there's a saying that one company's scrap is another company's gold. And I think that would probably be a rather appropriate way to end the video, don't you think? Listen, I want to thank you for coming along this journey with me and following the story of these West Midlands PTE Bristol VRs. Now, I know this is the second time we've touched on this batch of buses in a very short time, and I do apologise for that, but this video kind of came up and I thought, I've got to do that. I really have. And despite its rather gloomy conclusion, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, please like and share it. And if you can, please hype the video. Hyping helps the video and the channel get noticed by YouTube. And of course, we want to find more like-minded bus enthusiast friends out there, don't we? We want to find some more people like ourselves who like buses and coaches. So the more people who find the channel, the better it is. You can all say you can come home and watch SCTV. And also don't forget to subscribe to the channel too, so you don't miss future releases and updates that I make on the channel. And if you're enjoying what I'm doing with the channel and the videos that we're making, you can always buy me a drink. Just click on the super thanks button and it will guide you through how to do that. And I would be eternally grateful, and I will thank you very much in advance. Thank you. Talking of money, don't forget that all money raised by this channel goes to the continued upkeep and restoration of the buses within the Southern Counties Omnibus collection. And it does take an awful lot of time and money to look after these buses, so it all really does genuinely help. By watching videos on old buses, you are helping old buses, and that makes you an absolutely amazing human being. Thank you so very much for watching. Bye for now.